John, would you say that hands-on experience beats credentials any day?
Any day.
What's the biggest danger for cruisers and sailors?
Drinking.
On average, how many days on the water does a boat owner spend in the United States?
According to the insurance companies, usage is, I think, 13 or 14 days.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Full Displacement Podcast. My guest today is John Schafer, and he's an expert in all things sailing safety and training. I've met John Schafer at the Harrington Harbor Sailing Association, so little plug for HHSA. He's a neighbor of ours, great friend, and fantastic sailor and mentor. So without further ado, welcome to the show, John.
Hello, how are you today?
Doing fantastic. Getting ready to go sailing soon.
Well, yeah, really soon, hopefully.
So let's start with your background, John. Tell us about you. Where did you start as a leader, trainer, coach, and then how did your sailing passion begin?
Well, I have to blame it on my father. We had this, I think it was a Snark, a styrofoam sailboat with a mast you stuck in, and maybe it would stay in, maybe it wouldn't. And I had to be like 5 years old. I came across a video of it this year. And so actually my first time on a boat, apparently I was a bowman, despite the fact it didn't have a jib. That's where I was.
And where
And
was this?
that was in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. So I really started sailing a lot in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. They had a family had a place up there, and that's where we would go. And it led into just me always wanting to be on the boat and being with my family, my father. It was just a really great time. And then that led into, through my dad's racing, getting on the boat with him, and then taking the boat different places, regattas, and just had a great time doing it. And then it always stuck with me. So I just continued sailing and racing and then going offshore, which was just absolutely fantastic. And then I was hooked. And so despite my being in the military, where I ended up in Hawaii, which was great because they had some nice boats out there, and then we're sailing offshore. That was an 89 all the way to like the 93. And that really developed the leadership skills because, again, I was with some great sailors. And despite the fact that my boss, a general at the time, graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy, I was in the Army, and he was a general in the Army. And that's just a long story in and of itself. Another great sailor. So we just really had a great time. And so it was a great combination of that military training, policies, procedures, and then sailing, and then with great leaders, which are just amazing gentlemen and individuals that I still have friendships with today, even from that long ago.
Wow, awesome. And we do talk a lot about, skills development when we sail, including the leadership skills, especially when you are an owner skipper and you have to be responsible for not only the boat, but also the safety of your crew. Tell me a little bit about how Ministry of Sailing came about.
So Ministry of Sailing is a company that started literally out of COVID. Me and my best friends were sailing down in St. Martin, and that was like 2020, like that first week of March. Remember when all the airlines and traffic shut down, where the world shut down? The Heineken Regatta was the last regatta that year. And so we were sitting there talking about what we're going to be doing. And we had always been talking about a technique that I was really fortunate to develop a very long time ago with my best friend, about how to take somebody off of a sailboat to rescue somebody. And so again, that whole concept of, many incidents where the boat came close or the boat hit people and they just weren't able to get the persons on the boat, and we lost sailors because of that. But since we were all military and former military, now pro racers, we understood that in order to do this, you had to have procedures, policies, and ways to do it, and techniques. And so we wrote the Sailing Rescue Swimmers Handbook from there. And then we started a course, and our main motivation is that it isn't for everybody. But as people are starting to see some of the more powerful boats doing that, and as they see procedures for rescue swimmers, we didn't want people to start it on their own and try unproven techniques. So we brought in PJs, pararescue guys. We brought in the Coast Guard rescue swimmers. We brought in some Navy folks that do this for a living, and we put together a lot of procedures on how to do this and started a training program, which we'll do for boats or we'll do for clubs. And people want to do it, we'll bring our show to them. Procedures are key, but there's three elements to make this thing work. Number one, personal protection equipment. All right, if you're going to put a second person in the water, especially near a hull, you have to have a helmet and other devices which help keep them semi-afloat, not afloat. But at the same time, that's why we use the manual pull life jacket. That's the rescue swimmer one. So you have the personal protection equipment. You have to have the right procedures, but most importantly, the right procedures with the trained rescue
Right.
swimmer
So you have to be a trained person to
and a
become
trained
this.
crew
Right.
and crew training. So those are the elements that we really get
Yeah.
into. Yeah.
And while this is generally, say, more perhaps targeted at pro sailors and offshore sailors, I think a lot of this translates very much into recreational boating anyway, because it's all about the equipment, the
Mhm.
practice, the knowledge. And so being aware of this, I think, is obviously essential. And we're going to get into this today. What is the state of safety instruction and training today for sailors or cruisers? Are there
Yeah.
some gaps, John? Let's be honest
Oh,
here.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like, let's just talk about the required Coast Guard equipment. That is the minimum. And if you're on a sailboat and you only have the minimum, our opinion, my opinion, and I think many other safety leaders are that you are not prepared. Or if you just meet the minimum, that means what? Flares, a sound making device, a visual display, fire extinguishers, all right, a throwable device. I mean, if you're just looking for the minimum, that's not good enough because you need to be prepared for any eventuality based on likelihood and also based upon, the frequency of that, the likelihood and how much impact that's going to be. So when you're sailing, it's constantly a method of recreational sailing. You're going out to have your best day ever, where a professional captain is, going there prepared for any eventuality of risk. And I think what's happening now, we're in this state where people think that often just the minimum is good enough, where just the likelihood of that as being true is very, very low in all effectuality. That is not going to be good enough. And so that's why we point to the SERs in the United States, the safety equipment requirements, or, since my channel's got so many internationals, we talked about the World Sailing Offshore Special Regulations. And that's just that whole other list based on the experience of those things that happen at sea. So those lists aren't just put together whimsical. They're usually after some tragic incident or a serious incident.
Yeah, it is true that we actually learn from other people's mistakes, sometimes very dramatic mistakes. So it's really helpful to have someone like you that can bring all this in and draw conclusions and help coach, sailors along in basically implementing best practices. I will reflect back on what you said about, meeting SERs, safety equipment requirements from U.S. Sailing. It's often said that when you become a racer as a sailor, you just become a better sailor because you're safer, you're more aware of risks, and
Mhm.
you're better equipped to prevent them in the first place. I will say that's true. I started offshore racing and sailing and discovered really quickly the little bit I didn't know when I was just, cruising around it. And that's okay. It's just there's so much you don't know. I don't want to make it a mountain and I don't want to make it intimidating, but be very humble in front of the ocean, right? Can we go back and talk about the various sailing certification systems that exist? You mentioned US Sailing. There are others. Can you give us a quick overview of what exists today for people looking to get proficiency knowledge around sailing and obviously those best practices that relate to safety?
Absolutely. All right. First, I mean, really, in the United States, you have three mechanisms to learn the basics. Even if you have the ASA 101, 102, going up to the 4 whatever, right? That's a lot of really good book knowledge. You also have the Safe Boater Education for U.S. Sailing, right? You have all that. Every state has some sort of requirement on a certain age, you need a boating license. All of this is developed to develop awareness, all right? You're gonna know what a jib is, you're gonna know how to use the lines, you might not know how to fly a kite or a spinnaker, all right? All of those are just basic knowledges. Often I get on boats with individuals that have all the certifications or even the Coast Guard 6-pack or the master's license. Now, the master's license is different because you have to have experience on the boat, but taking a course doesn't tell experience. And I deal with that all the time where people buy a boat, they have all their certifications, they get on the boat, they don't know how to tie a bowline. They don't know how, they don't have the experience on the vessel. If you buy a new boat, it's going to take you a minimum of a year to understand how to drive sail that boat. 100%. It's going to take you a minimum of a year. But the average use in the United States from the insurance companies of a vessel is 13 to 14 times a year.
Wow. Just 14 days on the water. That's it on average.
That's exactly it, right? And so how do you get that experience? And so one of the things we do is we will come onto the boat and work with the people. And one of my favorite things to do, especially for cruising couples, and it's the technique I use is there's usually a stronger sailor on a boat and somebody who's a companion sailor, right? It's one person who does all the work and one person who may or may not follow instructions. I take the lesser person when we leave the dock, and they're the first ones to drive. And I stand behind them and I start coaching them. And so what that does is it allows that person to immediately take command of the vessel. And so they automatically on day one start going through all the drills. And the more powerful person does that. Now, that does two things. Number one, it starts giving them experience in case somebody else can't do anything. But all of a sudden, it levels the playing field that the person who's the more stronger sailor or the stronger person, or even just a stronger personality, gets out of that position of command and has to start listening. And that starts setting up a communication process. But that's how I do it. But it's the importance is getting the experience. And there's no better way to get experience than writing your checkbook and bringing a pro on board and buying it from them. It's absolutely.
How long does that first training take if you say come to a couple and they're new to them boat? What do you recommend as the time of hands-on with that crew to get them up to speed and comfortable on their boat?
Usually, again, it depends on the boat, depends on their experience. But if they're like the new people just getting to their first big boat, we'll say anything over 35 to whatever. I would say it would be like probably 2 to 3 sessions, and those would be like probably sessions going to like 16 hours per. And so that's what you're looking at. So about 30 to 40 hours. And what's interesting is if you look at most of the standards for training education, that's what you're about the same 30 to 40 hours of time on the boat. But the first thing I do day one is just maybe just some docking exercises and not a lot of sailing because I'm concerned about my own safety. And so the first thing is going through those SER checklists and explaining each and every one of those safety devices. And if they don't have them, we make recommendations, point out where they can get them and things like that, because I'm concerned about my own safety. And if they don't have the minimums, we don't go out. It's like, well, the
Good
boat's
point.
yeah, the boat's not going out. And I tell them, hey, I don't really care about you guys. I care about myself. All right. If, just to make the point on how important the safety is. And so,
Okay.
and so that's it. I mean, I do deliveries. It's in the contract of the responsibility for the owners, and then you have my responsibilities. All that safety equipment, if it's not on there, there's a likelihood that I might not leave that day.
I don't know if you would recommend this, but sometimes you'll have perhaps a group or a family that wants to go on a charter and get education on a sister ship. Let's say they have either a boat on order or they haven't purchased the boat, but they want to get acquainted with a similar boat to the one they're looking to buy, which we at Current Yachts will typically recommend. Would you accompany a group or a couple on a charter on a similar boat to the one, or you think it's really critical to be on the boat that you're going to buy to get going with that hands-on training?
Well, coming as close as possible is going to be important. Does it have to be the exact one? No. But if it has the same features, I'm fine with that. Yes, I would go on board with them. Of course, who wouldn't do that? Especially as a licensed master, we could bareboat it without anything when I'm on board as the skipper. All right. So you have that going as well. Absolutely. Any time on the water is going to be good time, but the best time on the water is going to be on your boat, knowing your boat. Even if you never leave the dock and you're fiddling around, you're learning the boat, and that experience is so valuable.
Yeah, 100%. And then going back to the other training options or certification options, can you talk to us about RYA, which is often looked at the gold standard globally, or is that a
Yeah,
mistake?
absolutely. I would say the RYA is the gold standard when it comes to courses. And it's because of the time that you have to put on the water to get that experience. And the courses are I mean, you really have to show mastery of the skills in order to pass the RYA, which isn't necessarily the case with everything else.
Are you also familiar with a training platform called Nauticad? Have you looked
Yeah.
into that at all?
Yeah, Nauticad is a great platform. That's the online platform. They do a really good job. Their videos, I like their presentations, are really good. But again, you need to get on a boat. You need to know how to even place your hands near a winch. I mean, these techniques are critical. Like when I'm training, I make sure people are in the proper position to use a winch, which is not sitting down and just laying back,
For
because
sure.
that will end up causing injuries. Making sure you have the mount wraps on before you break a line that's under load. How many times do we see people, break a clutch and they got burns in their hands? Gloves on or gloves off, it doesn't make a difference. That's going to heat up really quick, and you could still get burns because they're not breaking it, taking a wrap around the winch when it's loaded. These are the techniques that pros can really bring on there to show that there's procedures. And remember, the procedures of doing things are there so you're safe. And so going through the procedures and walking through step one, step two, step three. And then the other thing is, any military ship that you get on in the Navy, specifically an aircraft carrier, you have 6,000 people on an aircraft carrier. If the lowest person on that ship sees something unsafe, they can stop all operations until that safety is corrected. And that's what has to be happening. Safety is really a function of leadership. And without positive leadership, you're not going to have positive safety. And so leaders need to develop on every single boat systems to build a team together. And so they understand the procedures so they can move appropriately on the boat so they make it a safer boat. So when somebody sees something, they must be able to make that adjustment. I like to say it is the skipper's job, and the sign of success for the skipper is when the lowest person on the boat who doesn't have the most experience can speak freely and ask questions without things coming back at them. Say, well, you should know that by now. You need to develop and foster this idea that you're developing a team on the boat, that anybody, if they feel safety or they see something else, can say anything without somebody coming over the top of them and making them feel like they don't belong on the boat. Our job is to make people belong to the boat, be on a team. And without that type of attitude, you're going to have often conflict, which is always fun to manage, or you're going to have unsafe situations that happen where people said, well, I saw that and I didn't say anything.
I can't agree more, especially if you're looking to build crew, this lowest denominator or the weakest link, whatever you call this person.
Hmm.
That was you one day. That was you, and you
Yeah.
continued on and you became stronger, and so will everybody on your crew. It's a really good sign when nobody's yelling on the boat, and after a good day of sailing, you still talk to each other, especially after racing. But in general, I think it is very true. Safety is also everybody's concern. So let's say you're a cruising family. All of your children should know some of the basic safety operations and procedures because that is also on them, right, to ask questions and understand. So just for everybody to be aware of. I wanted to dive into the equipment safety wise. We talked earlier about US Coast Guard is one standard, but it's not enough. What are some of the things that you recommend to cruising couples and families that they add to their boat for safety purposes?
I'm just going to go and run off the top of my head, but right off the top of my head. But I'm going to encourage everyone to look at the U.S. Sailing Safety Equipment Regulations and look at the World Sailing Offshore Special Regulations. Now, the difference is they're almost identical. As a matter of fact, you could almost cut and paste them. Uh,
Okay. So
all
what
right.
are the high points then?
Well, let me tell you why I do that. I do that because I do not want to share another opinion of somebody on the dock. These are recommended standards. And as long as we point to standards, it's not our opinion. This is the body of professionals, safety professionals who say this is what are required. All right. So I think the first one for going near shore, coastal, or offshore overnight, for me, the most important is thinking about how you get water out of your boat. All right. And so the regulations that we refer to say that you have to have a 3,200 gallon per hour pump auxiliary. The other thing is 2 manual stations that can dewater the boat, one inside the boat, one outside the boat. So those are manual pumps as well. So dewatering is having a dewatering plan is absolutely important. I think when you buy a boat, one of the first things you should do is fill that bilge with water and turn on the bilge pump and time how long it takes to get the water out. It also gives you an opportunity to clean the bilge, so it's always clean when you're there. Fire, fire is crucial. Fire doubles every 30 seconds in size. And so having understanding on how to use a fire extinguisher and how to put out a fire and where the likelihood of those fires are going to be on your boat is going to be critical as well. Understand there's a lot of aft cabins that are being made these days without escape hatches on them. Okay, so that is another one. So always having a second exit is really going to be important. And you must be able to identify that to people so they can mitigate their risk a lot quicker if they are in a situation where they can't get out of there. So they need to be the first ones out to get out if you put people in a cabin such as that. I think the other safety thing to really emphasize is going to be backup lights at night. How often do we have people cruising at night? Their lights go out, and where we're sailing on the Chesapeake Bay, it's just so dangerous. Or Delaware, or on the eastern coast, it's just so dangerous not to have those lights. I've had 3 different occasions being offshore where I've lost all the lights on the vessel through various problems, and having the backups were absolutely great. And that's in my kit, what I always bring with me. But I think what's important is to find these things out. If you just search the offshore special regulations or the SERs from US Sailing, they come in a list, and it's going to be important to read those lists and understand that. And then the last thing is life jackets and PFDs. I mean, the life jacket is really important, and it's not just having a life jacket, it's having the ones that will save your life. And understanding the purposes for the special things that are added to it, like a life jacket with leg straps, is going to be very important. Remember, a life jacket's a cork, and you're the wine bottle, all right? The cork's pushing up, and you're going down, and the leg straps will help keep that life vest down around from your head and keep your head higher out of the water. It should have a splash guard that comes on it. That's going to be really important. And understanding how to use those things are going to be critical. Having a light on it, having a whistle on it. The other thing is the throwable devices. We see all the times we have people with the horseshoes or the rings on the back of their boats, right? That's a really great thing to have. But why not add reflective tape to it? Why not add a whistle to it? Why not add a water light to it? Because if you have a man overboard at night, you will not find the person. All right. And understand the new devices and techniques that they have, the AISs and the PLBs. Understand the difference of those. The difference is a personal locating beacon is a small personal one that goes to a satellite, where the AIS goes back to your boat or the possibility of other boats, depending how you use it. But then again, every single tool that you have needs to be trained. People must understand how to use them properly, and they have to demonstrate that they know how to use them properly.
And the first thing would be wearing that life jacket and making very few exceptions for not wearing your life jacket, because that is probably the single most important device that, if not worn, it is useless and you should have it on. I also wanted to ask you to speak about the training options that are available for racers or even cruisers alike. There is a training called Safety at Sea that is often mandated for a percentage of the crew on some of these offshore races, and would be otherwise a fantastic opportunity for those looking to do long distance cruising to really get some hands-on training, knowledge, and even, community building amongst other sailors. And the things you discussed, such as fire suppression, redundancy of bilge pumps for dewatering,
Mhm.
keeping your power systems active, because if you don't have batteries, you don't have dewatering. Your bilge pump, your electric auxiliary bilge pump, will not work. So all of these things, and life jackets.
Yeah,
They will put you in a pool with your life jacket. Can you speak to that? Because obviously you are, I think you are a instructor,
I
or what's
am.
the word?
Yeah, so I'm a moderator for Safety at Sea. That's
Moderator.
exactly right. So I'm not the moderator of the chat room. I'm the moderator for the Safety at Seas, right? So what's really neat about that, and the feedback from the people who attend, there's like 15 modules that you go through online. All right. You can also go through them on person, but then you can actually do the hands-on day. And that's the most critical where that showing that you know how to use devices are very important. You hear from the pros. Some of the best pros around the world are usually speakers that are there. So this would be great to see. But you will actually understand how to jump into the water, feel how your life jacket inflates. You'll understand that when it comes around your neck, it chokes you. And then you understand how to deflate it a little bit to make it more comfortable, how to deflate it to help yourself get into a life raft. One of the biggest surprises that people have when they do this exercise is when they find out how difficult it is to crawl into the life raft. And so you will actually go through that training and they'll take you through a flare station, learn how to use flares. All the time we hear people talk about flares, but when they come to lighting it, they don't know how to light it. You learn how to do the fire. All right. A lot of people think that it's just important to grab the fire extinguisher to go fight a fire. But what they don't realize is the recommended technique is to have somebody go fight with you with a spare fire extinguisher. Because when you get to that fire and you run out, you don't want to have to run back. And so the person behind you is there for your safety to guide you, hand you another one and ready to go. So you will actually practice these techniques on real fire. We have a fire bin. It's all safe and it's usually run by a fire specialist who's probably a local fire department. But these are the critical aspects. Damage control. You'll go through how to stop water and flooding in a damage control station. You'll go through a damage control and how to de-rig a boat that might have a broken mast or how to set a sail to work one of the broken mast. So you learn those functional skills that when help is so far away that you must be able to help yourself. And you go through the tools on what's going to be important for de-rigging a boat, those things for damage control, and you learn from experts who have done it time and time before. And so that's what it's critical. You get that hands-on, and then you can take that and modify that for your own boat.
And is that certification good for 4 or 5 years?
It's
5 years?
5 years.
At which point you have to take on the hands-on portion again, correct?
Right, and then you have to do a refresher course again. You wanna know the
Yeah.
secret behind it?
Tell me.
It will pay for itself. Do you know why? Because if you show this certificate to your insurance company, they'll probably take 100 to 200 bucks off a year for your insurance to show that you have proficiency in those skills.
All right.
Happened to me on my boat. That's been my personal experience. So therefore, with a couple has it, they would be able to get the insurance discount on their boat, showing the proficiencies.
Yeah, and for having done that safety at sea training, I was at the Naval Academy here
Mhm.
on the Chesapeake Bay, and we had a speaker. Don Riley was one of them. There were many others. It's a wonderful experience. It is really humbling, and honestly, you learn so much. You just wondered how you even cruised or sailed for so many years without it, because it really brings your awareness to the risk. So
Right.
thank you for sharing that, John.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, I have a separate safety log other than my regular log that has all my safety devices. There's a couple pages for life vests, life vests, PLBs. That keeps all the registrations on there. And every year I blow mine up and have them all there and wake up in the morning and I tested them and I write on there when they were last tested. A lot of people just have their life vests and they just have them thrown in there and they don't inspect them annually or yearly. And that's important to understand that and have that log together because you have to understand how to use your safety devices. And that's it. Understand them fully. And then the more you understand it, the more you're going to be likely to use it.
Yeah, and it's on you. It's your safety. It's on your person to save your life. Make sure it's working. Make sure the cartridge is in the jacket and has CO2 left
Yeah.
in it, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Make sure there's no chafe on the jacket. All the things that would otherwise compromise this life jacket we could talk about, but I'm sure you can find an inspection video on how to review
Yeah.
your own PFD, but essential. A few words about EPIRB versus AIS versus PLB
Hmm.
that we're recommending in racing.
Hmm.
Uh, there's obviously going to be different variety, right, of tracking devices. Can you speak
Right.
to that a bit?
Absolutely. So the EPIRB, all right, is usually attached to the vessel. Now, my recommendation is it's always on the rear of the vessel outside and it has a float free device. So it'll automatically go with the hydrostatic release. Often you'll see people put them on the inside, mounted up nice and pretty. They really should go on the rear of the vessel or a place where it can float free if the boat goes down. So what the EPIRB does is the EPIRB sends a signal to a satellite. That satellite will then send it to a ground station. The ground station identifies the boat because, of course, it should be registered the day you get it. Make sure it's registered with all your data and information on. And then on that registration, it's not a one and done. If you're going to be going offshore or for a distance, there's a place for other data, and that's where you put in what your float plan would be. That is critical because when they get that signal, that EPIRB going out, and they see that there is notes in there saying, like, say you're racing from Annapolis to Bermuda, it's halfway to Bermuda, they're going to see that on that date that this EPIRB went off halfway to Bermuda, the response time is going to be different from them having to call all the emergency numbers. So that way you do that work. So that's what that works. That data works for the EPIRB, and the personal locating beacons are the ones that you would wear on you or have in your pocket. So both of those go to a satellite system first, and then it goes to a ground station. Then it goes to the region of where that happened, and then you'll have the conversations that trying to people to go and do the rescue to respond to that EPIRB. The AIS, now they make the AIS beacons for Man Overboard. Those work in two different ways. They can either go directly to your boat, all right, but there is also a mechanism where you can make that go to the general area. So within, they say 12 miles, but on the water, I would say between 1, depending on sea state, and maybe 5 to 6 miles, other boats in the region will be able to hone in on there. But both of those signals, by the way, will work with the rescue aircraft. So the rescue aircraft can dial directly into those signals and come to that point in that location. All right. So both of them are great devices, and they have made significant differences in life savings, and the stories are there. Like if you go to the ACR website, you can see the stories of people that have been rescued at sea from there, and they're just unbelievable stories.
Yeah, ACR is one of the manufacturers, I think the
Hmm.
leading manufacturer for those devices. So very important distinction, the PLB versus the AIS. So the AIS is for localized rescue, identifying, finding the person in the water.
Hmm.
Evidently, we talked about the life jacket hopefully has a light, has some reflective tape, reflective material, so you can spot this person. And meanwhile, the PLB sends that information out for rescue. That's really important.
Yeah, absolutely
Very
right.
good. Thank you for listening this far. We really appreciate you tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe. Now let's continue the program with John. The next chapter I wanted to unfold with you a little bit, and probably that ties in a little bit more to your career, is first aid and safety of people on board. Can you speak to that a little bit in the scope of sailing and cruising long distance?
I mean, imagine the bad things that are going to happen to you on the boat. All right, concussions, very bad. Right, prevention is always going to start with that. I always have a helmet on my boat. Every boat I've ever have. When I'm delivering, the same thing. I always bring my helmet with. All right, because sea states, things busting around, you don't know what's going to happen, but there are going to be times where helmet might be a really good idea.
So it's not just for climbing the mast, it's just to wear inside the cabin if you're worried about a knockdown
Oh,
or
you think
something?
of the injuries. Ooh, a Cole got a concussion. So how many people got thrown off the Imokas in the waves? I've been thrown from one side of the boat to the other in sea states. I've been bounced off of ceilings, unfortunately, before. Yeah. So yeah, I always have a helmet, and helmets are a good idea to do. And I'm not just saying a helmet. I recommend snow ski helmets because they're rated for collisions. So don't just buy like a helmet, and then they seem to be smoother for more aerodynamic, so they don't get hung up on stuff. So yeah, helmets are great, but first aid, talk about prevention. We're going to talk about understanding those things that can cause you harm. So cleaning a boat in a way so you're not slipping and falling to cause things, turning off the gas, understanding where the knives are stored, where the sharps are stored, the cuts are stored, and then understanding those things here. So then it's going to be cuts, it's going to be breaks, it's going to be stop bleeding, it's going to be medicines, it's going to be all those things that can cause you harm to be prepared for. But it's not just about preparing the first aid kit. It's getting the training to understand how to use the first aid kit. And I'm going to tell you, for couples that are going offshore, for going for a long trip, it's imperative that they have, if they're over 40, heart stress test, and a dental exam before they go for long. Those are two things that are going to be critical to make. As a matter of fact, in one of the first aid classes that I was in and doing some training with, A guy wrote me a letter the next week, says, somebody said when they took my pulse that I should see a doctor because it was irregular. He found out that he was an AFib. He said it saved his life. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's really, really important to understand that not only is it important to have this first aid kit, but to understand how to use those devices and to get the training to enable to make somebody a little more comfortable in their most difficult situation.
And if someone has followed first aid for sailors training and
Mhm.
say they're trained to use an AED, is that something you would recommend somebody over a certain age puts on their boat, or if they're at risk?
It just depends on the situation. All right. The AEDs get the nautical one because it's a water environment. I just don't grab one off the shelf. But again, that's the reason we're trying to get the stress test done, is so you're not in the position to have to use that.
Very good
Prevention
point.
is the key because no one's going to be doing CPR. I don't care how your big team is or over an hour on a boat. I mean, I've had the unfortunate experience to have to perform CPR, and you will not believe how exhausting it is.
John, where do you go to do a stress test? Is this something you get from your physician?
Absolutely. Well, your physician can hook it up for you and do that, but absolutely you can do that. You should be seeing your physician anyway, and if he's over 40, he should be saying, "Oh, you're gonna be in a remote situation, then you better get that." Well, hopefully, they would say that.
And I really like what you said about preventing injury by keeping things secure on the boat. One of the things that I've learned, so my husband and I race on a J42 offshore, and the one thing that he's been taught and that we've been following religiously is assume the boat gets knocked down or put upside down. All the things that could fall or open will. And so we have, those extra fat rubber bands to
Mhm.
keep the nav table shut. We have push locks that actually keep the drawers shut. Sometimes those don't work very well, so make sure they work. Very important to have everything secured, tethered on the boat for that very reason. So I appreciate that very much.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing is the strapping down of batteries and floorboards. I mean, the requirement
Floorboards, absolutely, yeah.
keep those floorboards, their mechanisms down. We used to use what do we use? A PVC pipe that just like went right across everything, and then it also helped stop things from going side to side that we would store underneath the tables and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Or even your top loading fridge doors. Sometimes those are
yeah,
really heavy. So we have a button and we create a little notch to make sure that it stays shut should the boat, get knocked
absolutely
down.
right. Yeah, absolutely right.
And all of
Like,
this, by the way, we didn't make up. This is all part of the things we learned from reviewing those SERs we were just discussing.
that's
So
exactly right. All of these are in the SERs. That's exactly right.
awesome. So John, all of this is a lot. What do you recommend to somebody who perhaps is not really experienced? Where do they begin?
Training. All right, training. Get on there,
Hands
and then
on?
yeah, of course, the boat will do exactly what you tell us to do up until coming up close to the wind, right? I think the biggest thing is to get somebody on board that's patient with them, that can talk to them. I used to be a screamer on the boat because that's the way I was taught. I actually had to go through leadership training to not become a screamer on the boat. I could make sailing a very unpleasant experience for people. I'm really good at
I'm
that.
sure you could.
But but I got some feedback and I was receptive to the feedback. And so I retrained my brain on how to react. And I retrained my brain how to give commands in a way that people understood. And I came up with some rules for myself. Those are the rules I put together for every boat. When I walk on the boat, I tell people what the rules are. I set the expectations of behavior. All right. And I ask them their best way to receive feedback. Because I'm going to be giving feedback. That's my job, right? And then it's my responsibility when I understand how they receive feedback, when I understand how they best learn, is to present the material in a way which meets them at their needs. I think it's really critical to understand that. And then if people are taking the training, I think there's two questions they're going to have to ask that are very important. The first question is, show me how to use a preventer. All right. There's so many injuries that happen from a boom running around unsecured, or people not understanding when the boat gets light, when they're almost dead downwind, what's going to happen to the boom. So people need to understand how to use a preventer, talk to a rigger how to set up the preventer for your boat, and understand the theory behind it. I think that's it, and they have to practice it. I think that's a critical aspect of sailing. And the other one is understanding and have written down the depowering sequence and understand how to do it on that boat. because that's where I think people get in trouble is when they get overpowered and they don't know how to depower their boats and take the loads off of the boat by putting it at a certain angle, or the depowering sequence for rolling up a furling as opposed to putting down the main. Those are real critical. I mean, there are some of the training programs we talked about. They actually train people to head up in the wind in order to roll up their roller furling on the jib, which is ludicrous. I mean, I'm sure the sail manufacturers love that because you're gonna be flogging that thing like crazy, but I see so many people out there doing that. I don't know if you've ever seen me depower and put the on old velocity when we put that thing down. We fall off to about 150. We cover the jib with the main. We let the clue out, rolls up in 15 seconds, turn the boat right around, main's right back in another 15 seconds. Less than a minute, 45-foot sailboat, blowing 30 knots. We got everything in about a minute. That is how good people need to understand their boat. Have a goal, set the expectations, and understand how to depower that boat and the depowering sequence, which is critical. That's how
Yeah,
you
and
stop
another
injuries.
For sure. Another aspect too we haven't really, delved into because it could be another 2-hour conversation, but it's also planning, right? So
Yeah,
weather routing and weather expectations, you will make some mistakes and know what to do to ride out a storm. But the best thing is to avoid the storm if you can, because
yeah,
a lot of the time as a cruiser, you have a choice. So make those choices and then know the techniques like you were just talking about. But it's also reefing and
yeah, yeah,
using your storm sails, right? So you have
exactly.
to rig them first at the dock to figure out how to even do that. So all of these things too are often covered in the drill and certification that are required for offshore racing. So if you look at
Absolutely right.
those, you actually get a really good sense of what you should be doing to practice as a family or as a couple, which I'm sure you go through your training.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in a salty dog, all right, it's a cruise, right? They're cruising down there. Even they're taking safety at sea now, but the conversations are, well, who was first? so, so, so it's definitely always fun to hear those techniques and see what people are doing.
What's on the agenda for Ministry of Sailing in 2026, John? What's happening?
So this is a really big year for us. First of all, we're launching our clothing line.
Fantastic. Everybody loves swag.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so, somehow, nobody has ever, trademarked the term "try not to die," which is my favorite term, and it seems to be very popular, and so we have, coming online in March, we got a small test store out there now, but we have that, but the most critical thing for me is really the Regatta Safety Officer certification we've developed. During a regatta, we believe that a single individual needs to have the responsibility for the safety. The other thing which is important is clubs need to be ready for the worst case scenario through a crisis management plan, specifically for a regatta. And that's my background. My background is in crisis management and high risk situations and responding to emergencies. The world's worst emergencies for the last 30 years are unfortunately a place that I lived, and looking at the risks which are similar, like imagine a person who's kidnapped in Afghanistan, or you have a boat that's in trouble in the middle of the ocean. You know, the crisis response for the corporate is exactly the same. And so what we've done is we've taken a simulated exercise, the same one I used to use for very critical incidents, and we made it a regatta simulated exercise. So an organization can actually practice their crisis management plans and develop their crisis management plans. It's a 1-day exercise. And I have to tell you, you feel the fear in the room because that's how realistic it is. Because the last place you want to find out your crisis management plan is broken is in the midst of a crisis. So it gives organizations an opportunity to practice their plans and talk about executive decision making. Now, everybody and every yacht club is encouraged to have an emergency action plan. Those are decisions for the lower level management to make decisions like grab a fire extinguisher, call 911.
Mhm.
but there are some events that are critical events that have reputational risk involved. Lives might be in jeopardy. Families might be showing up at a club. Press might be showing up at a club. All of these elements will go through and how to manage those and how to prepare for those types of incidents. And it's critical. I think it's really critical for any organization and any leader who's a leader of a sailing organization to understand that there are some executive decisions that need to be made or be prepared beforehand. And that's what we'll be doing, is really encouraging that for a safer experience for everybody who's sailing.
Love that. And someone had to do it, and I'm glad it's you. So we're very excited to have this
Yeah,
basically extra safety guardrail for race organizers. Thank you, John.
you're welcome. Yeah, that's our latest and greatest, but the web page is new. It's looking really good.
Yeah, and in fact, I was going to point out listeners to the resource pages that you have on your site, and we'll put the links below for the checklists that are essential for you have one for new boaters. There's a few other things out there, so I'll link them below. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you on the water. Fair winds.
Great. Thank you very much.